If you were to ask 17-year-old me what the three branches of the federal government in the US were, I would maybe be able to tell you, maybe. But I wouldn't really be able to get too in depth and probably wouldn't understand how they function or why they didn't always. If you feel comfortable with your understanding of the American system, then you could skip this part. But if you want to understand it or feel comfortable explaining it to others, then definitely hang around till the end. First things first, this is about the federal government. State government is a whole different thing. Also, I'm not a legal or constitutional scholar. This is like a basic civics level of understanding of the system. The branches in our government are outlined in the Constitution. It was largely written by this guy. We will discuss the Constitution more whenever we talk about the Judicial Branch. But there are three branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial. The idea is that no branch can be all powerful, and each should hold all the other branches in check. Article 1 of the Constitution defines the legislative branch in its whole. I'll put a link to the different sections below. But here's a quick overview. The legislative branch is Congress. Legislative basically means that they make our laws. So every federal law in the US was written and passed by Congress. Congress, though, is actually something called bicameral. That is sort of a fancy word that just means it's broken up into two different parts. One of those parts is the House. The House consists of what people call congressmen and congresswomen, or sometimes representatives. There are 435 representatives in the US at any one time. You have to be at least 25 to be elected into Congress, been a citizen for at least 7 years, and live in the state that elected you. Having 435 reps was a decision made to limit the size of Congress. The way they decide how many reps each state gets is by population. This is a big part of the reason why the census happens. Because how many representatives you get is decided by the population size. Delaware only has one congressperson, and California has 53. Each congressperson right now represents a little more than 700,000 people. It's a little more complicated than that because every state is guaranteed one representative, and some states have fewer citizens than that. But it averages to 1 per 711,000 people. States actually draw the districts that the Congress people represent, and all the people in that district choose who they want their congressperson to be. Whoever wins serves a 2-year term before having to be reelected. The House is sometimes referred to as the lower house. They do have unique powers in the government, though they are the one who handles the money or initiates bills involving spending. They also have similar powers of that of the Senate or the upper house. They can provide oversight of the federal government, subpoena people, and at one point they even had a jail where they locked people up for contempt. The House also has the power to impeach. This sounds more impressive than it actually is. Essentially, they can investigate the president and say that he needs to go to trial in the Senate because they believe that he needs to be removed. Impeached. Though, it doesn't actually remove the president or have any effect on him except forcing the Senate to try him. The upper house and upper chamber is the Senate. There is only 100 senators, and this number does not change unless we get a new state. Senators are elected for 6-year terms, and they have to be 30 years old or older. Every state gets 2 senators, regardless of population, and the entire state gets to decide which 2 senators they want to represent them. That means California, with a population of around 40 million people, has the same number of senators as Wyoming, which only has a population of 500,000. The Senate has lots of unique powers, some of the most important involving judges and cabinet members, and high level executive branch members. So the president chooses judges and the people in charge of different agencies that would make him super powerful, right? Except the Constitution says the Senate has the power to advise and consent. This means if the president says that he wants someone to be in charge of, let's say, the FBI, or to be a judge, the Senate has a duty to investigate that person, hold hearings about that person, and then vote on whether he should have that power and job. They have a rule called cloture, which basically means a vote of 60 senators is required to get most things done. The best way to think of this is the president gets to forward a resume and say, I want to hire this guy for the job. But the Senate actually hires that person or doesn't. Their role in impeachment is to take the referral given by the House of Representatives, hold a trial, and then vote on whether the president or judge or other official should be removed. It takes about 67 out of 100 votes to be removed from office. The way the bill becomes law is for the House and Senate to vote and agree that they want it to become law. Bills pass by majority in the House and usually by 60 votes due to cloture in the Senate. If a bill has 2/3 majority in both houses, the president cannot veto it and it becomes law. If it passes with fewer votes, he can veto it and stop it from becoming law. One of the powers of Congress is declaring war. Presidents cannot declare war, only the House and Senate. And that is the gist of Article 1. Article 2 is about the executive branch. This is the branch the president belongs to. A lot of what we think of as government is under the executive branch. All of these agencies and the military. The president is the civilian commander of the military, which is why he is sometimes called commander-in-chief. He can't actually declare war, but he is the one who decides what military actions are taken. He's advised by the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, among others. He also has codes to launch nuclear weapons. This is a big deal. There's a little bit of a debate on how much direct control a president has over the executive branch. Traditionally, he has very little control. So, he could appoint someone to be in charge of the FBI. If he told the FBI to investigate his enemies, that would be normally a big no-no. Not all of his indictments is enshrined in law. However, some of it is just tradition. You can imagine how powerful just the ability to appoint people is. For instance, the president appoints someone, the attorney general, to be in charge of the Department of Justice. The attorney general decides what types of crimes he wants to prioritize in America. And even if he wants them to basically ignore certain crimes, that could be having the federal government focus on arresting people who get caught with marijuana or people who launder money and not spend any resources prosecuting immigration cases, for instance. And the president also appoints subject to nomination as well. U.S. attorneys for different districts. So, He could appoint someone who wants to crack down on mafia or sex work in certain areas, and resources will probably be spent that way. A Secretary of State is our chief diplomat and oversees international relations. If you have someone in that seat who wants to bully people over someone who wants to negotiate, you're going to get very different foreign policy. The president also has the power to pardon people. This is limited, and there are some caveats. The president can only pardon people convicted of federal crimes. He has no power to pardon people arrested for state crimes, and people have to accept his pardon for it to be valid. The pardon can be turned down. People who are pardoned also lose their right to invoke the Fifth Amendment. This means they can be compelled to testify in court if they accept the pardon. We already discussed the veto power. The president can stop any legislation from becoming law by refusing to sign it unless it has veto-proof majority. He can also sign treaties, but they don't become law unless ratified by the Senate and, in some cases, the House. And that gets us to Article 3, the judiciary. This one is sort of the most basic and most complex branch. There are 94 federal districts within the U.S. They are in charge of trying civil and criminal cases. A civil case is like a lawsuit over money or damages, and a criminal case is like murder, drug trafficking, money laundering, etc. This is basically of what you think of as the trial court level. The next step is the appellate court. That is basically a fancy way of saying court of appeals. They have to hear all appeals. It's mandatory. They look at your case, if you request it, and they decide if your conviction should be overturned or if there was an issue with the law that invalidated the case or makes it worth review. If you don't like their decision, you could try to appeal to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court, though, takes very few cases, and I mean very few cases. About 80 a year. And now that you know the organization, what does the judicial actually do? Well, federal judges are appointed for their entire lives. They can retire, but they can't be fired. They can only be impeached and removed. Their job is to interpret the law and make decisions based on the law. At the lowest level, this is you get X years for Y crime or X amount of money in damages. At the highest levels, they also decide if law is constitutional. So if Congress passed a law and said that people weren't allowed to have free speech anymore, for instance, the Supreme Court could strike that law down and say it was unconstitutional and it would no longer be law. Some big examples of that would be the Defensive Marriage Act and the laws against sodomy. When the Supreme Court invalidated those laws as unconstitutional, it invalidated even state laws against gay marriage and consensual acts between adults. When the court invalidates or affirms laws, that is called judicial review. And that is basically that. The remaining aspects of government we haven't talked about really is the Electoral College. A lot of people think of America as a democracy, but the executive branch is not decided by direct democracy. Our president is chosen by electors. Right now, there are 538 electors. That is one for every congressperson and every senator. And then 3 for Washington, D.C. Those electors aren't the senators and congressmen, but they are distributed to states the same way. For instance, Texas has 36 representatives and 2 senators, so we have 38 electoral votes. In 48 states, the winner of the plurality of the vote for president gets all of that state's votes. That means if 5 million people voted for you and 5,000,001 voted for me in Texas, I would get all 38 electoral votes. If you get 270 votes, you're president. And that's the gist of how our system works. The next video shows why our system doesn't work.